Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to HANA's first quarter review. So the HANA Group generated operating profits of 367 million baht, which was 26% year-on-year increase, and from a low base over 1,100% on Q4 last year. The Thai baht weakened about 5.3% year-on-year. In terms of Thai baht sales, our sales were slightly down 1% at 6.37 billion, and operating profits were up 26%, as I mentioned earlier. The operating margin increased 1%, and we generated over 800 million baht in EBITDA. Net profit after tax increased 18% to 313 million from a year ago. And our net cash and short-term investments increased 183% from 3 billion to nearly 8.7 billion. Most of that was due to the increase of the private placement done in October last year. On a quarter-on-quarter basis, our sales increased slightly 2%. And as I mentioned earlier, operating profits increased over 1,000% because Q4 we had some exceptional write-downs, and we had an operating margin of 6% as opposed to nothing in Q4, and the rest was pretty much the same. So let me go through each of the main divisions. So for our main EMS business in Lamphun, HANA Micro Lamphun, they had a pretty good quarter actually, and quarter on quarter the sales were up 3.5% to 3.2 billion baht and up 4% year on year. Overall, the demand was strong, driven by automotive, industrial, and RF, that's radio frequency test and measurement business. Our medical was flat, and the mobile business for the EMS actually reduced a little bit. We see a recovery in industrials, and we continue to have a strong focus on productivity and automation because, as we all know, we are anticipating a minimum wage increase. In fact, I'd like to share with you some information that over the past 5 years, our automation group has reduced our operating headcount by 40% from just over 3,000 employees to 1,800, with a higher unit production and higher revenue sales as well. So this is how we can offset the always increasing minimum wage that continues. The second quarter outlook, I would say, remains pretty similar to the first quarter. I would just like to point out that HANA Micro Lamphun generated a record year last year. So if we can match that, I think we'll be doing very well in what is otherwise a challenging electronic environment. Automotive, which is one of the big drivers for us in the EMS business, is expected to grow, but the rate of growth is slowing down as high interest rates, particularly on the US dollar, continue to have an impact. Moving on to our EMS business, micro business in Jiaxing, they also started to perform better. Our first quarter revenues were up 13% on the quarter to 1.01 billion and 12% on the year. Our major customers for access control, security devices, and smart power grids modules, which is a new business we have, has seen improvement over the past year. And a weaker renminbi has also helped because, as you know, the Chinese government is struggling with a very weak Chinese economy, and they've been trying to lower the RMB versus the US dollar. In the second quarter, we project a higher trend because, of course, in the first quarter, we have a Chinese New Year impact. So that should be positive for a P&L. So the micro business in China is looking a bit more positive now. This is a chart to show how we anticipate PCs to perform this year. Although the PC business for HANA is not big, we do have an exposure both in the EMS side and the OSAT side, the packaging side. And this is a business that has been in decline for many, many years, but this year is expected to grow because of the new AI applications, which laptop makers like Lenovo, HP, Dell, Acer, etc., are going to introduce. So a lot of people are thinking to replace their laptops and tablets because of the new AI chips coming and the new AI chip functionality. Moving on to our IC test, assembly and test based in Ayutthaya. This is the main one for HANA. So we have a very challenging situation, unfortunately. Our Q1 revenues were down 4% quarter on quarter to 1.63 billion and down 11% on the year. I would say that overall the loading remains very, very weak, even weaker than in Q4 last year. So we're running at around 46% of capacity, which is a drop even from Q4 last year, which is very low. Our standard IC and hybrids were very weak. However, our custom business increased quarter on quarter due to some module increase. Again, we have to focus on strong cost control because the top line is not growing at this point in time. And when we look at our profitability in the first quarter this year compared to the first quarter last year, we actually increased our operating profits despite having a top line drop because of the strong cost control that the team have been working on. Of course, a favorable exchange rate has helped us, but the team have done an excellent job to minimize costs and still manage to make a small profit despite having a drop in sales. Now, we think customer inventory levels are getting pretty low, and I've been saying even 1 quarter ago that we expect the second half of the year to see an improvement in our IC business, and I still believe that. So the second quarter, albeit probably the same as the first quarter, but it starts the momentum of increase because we anticipate the second half to be much better. Not necessarily because consumers are buying more, but because the inventory levels are getting to the point where our customers have to start restocking due to very low inventory levels. Moving on to HANA IC in Jiaxing in China. Again, a very challenging environment, similar to Ayutthaya. Our sales, 126 million, down 9% on the quarter and down a large 49% year on year. Okay, so again, the OSAT business remains very weak. And what was keeping us going last year was our EV modules. But unfortunately, that dropped down because most of the EV modules we produce are going into the expensive cars in the US, which you may know is now struggling, right? The expensive EV cars are difficult to sell. So that business dropped down, and we didn't have that support in Q1 this year versus Q1 last year. The other business which we have in this division is the RFID inlay. Now, this is a business which is growing, but it requires certain certification. There's a body called Orban, and that continues to be pushed back. That said, we're now starting to have non-Orban certified work, so I think this will help that division moving through into second half of the year. The second quarter, I'm afraid, still looks very weak, and I have to report that our last remaining US customer, because of all the de-risking concerns, has moved out or will exit by the end of the middle of this year from China. So that is a very challenging situation for us, and of course the Chinese economy still remains very weak. Now, our new power management packages, which we have been investing in, is showing good potential, and we are investing to increase capacity, and we anticipate for this to start ramping up and having a positive impact on this division by the fourth quarter this year. But overall, we still forecast the Chinese OSAT business to remain weak until the end of the year, and this is a very challenging situation for the HANA IC division in Jiaxing. So as we look to the overall outlook of the semiconductor industry as a whole, okay, a lot of analysts are forecasting, good growth this year. Gartner 17%, IDC 20%. But frankly, this is driven by the explosion in AI and memory recovery, not so much on mixed signal and the type of, I would say, mature chips that the HANA group mainly is involved in. And unfortunately, we're not really involved in the AI and memory business. And this is another one from the World Semiconductor. They're saying, anticipating something like 15% up. But again, this is driven by AI and memory. Smartphones, which is a big part of HANA's exposure, is projected to do much better this year than in the previous years. And in the first quarter, Canalys, which is one of the big leading analyst companies, reported that the smartphone market increased 7.8% in the first quarter year on year. And so this is a very positive sign. And this is one thing that we are seeing now in our business, that there is a growing demand for components for the smartphone business, mainly the Android system. Most of our exposure is to Android, and mostly in, of course, Korea and in China. So this is one positive sign that we see moving forward. In terms of loading, so you can see over the past 5 quarters, starting from the second quarter last year, we saw a continual drop. But as it's starting to level out, and you can see the drop from Q4 to Q1 is very small, and Q2 probably will be similar to Q1, and then we believe it will start to increase gradually. So we might see this U-shaped effect. Moving on to our US operation based in Ohio, they're doing quite well. The first quarter revenues were up only 1% quarter on quarter, but 19% on the year. And our inlay business, which is the high growth potential, saw a 200% increase year on year. Tire tags were a little bit weak, but that's more seasonal. We have, as I've explained in previous reports, moving to a new facility, which you see at the top right. This is about 3 times the size of our existing one, and we need the space as we expand, particularly for the fast-growing inlay business. We are adding 2 more high-speed machines, which will come in Q3. So the outlook for inlays is looking very, very positive. Once again, Auburn certification seems to be delayed, but it's not causing a problem because we understand Auburn is not recertifying anybody at the moment, so we just ignore them. And the second quarter outlook looks continually strong. Again, growth for inlays continues to drive this, and we also see some improvement in tire tags. So we are projecting the second quarter to be an improvement over the first quarter. So this is a chart just to give you an idea. So if you look at on the left, 2023, the gray is the RFID inlays. And if you look to the right, projections for this year, you can see the gray moving from 17% to 43%. This is where the growth is going to come from for our Ohio operation in the US. Moving on to Cambodia. We unfortunately are going through, again, some difficult times. The sales were up 5% quarter on quarter, but down 26% on the year. We saw a reduction in 2 of our largest customers because most of the business is still related to remote controls, and that business remains very weak. We had a business we had over the course of last year, miniature coils, again, unfortunately for remotes, and that has reduced dramatically. So that has dragged down the earnings. The second quarter will remain weak, but we do have some new accounts coming in the second half of this year. And we have changed the management of HANA Cambodia to be managed by HANA Lamphun, and they've done a very good job to rationalize the cost and improve productivity. But we broke even last year but unfortunately, we're coming back to a small loss. It's not big, but we're not happy with that situation. We do have new opportunities, and we're talking to one of our largest RF customers who want to use the Cambodian location for the US TAA Trade Agreement Act to manufacture their product. That this won't really come probably until next year, but when it does, it'll be a significant increase in business, and we anticipate will turn HANA Cambodia into profitability then. So here's a chart to just give you an idea. Not a big change, to be honest, year on year in terms of the product end application. On the left, you can see telecom. So sensors increased. So that's, as I mentioned, the mobile phone business doing better from 2 to 4%. General telecom dropped a little bit, and the equipment went up a little bit. So slightly 1% overall for telecom. Automotive was the same at 23%. Industrials increased 3% from 13 to 16. RFID slightly down, not so much inlays, but that's the time and attendance RFID. Opto was the same, flat. Consumer down slightly. Computer down a little bit, but I anticipate that will come up given the improvements in demand for laptops over the course of the rest of this year. And medical was down slightly. In terms of exchange rates, which is very important for exporting companies, as you can see from this chart, starting from the beginning of this year, we saw at that time, there was a lot of expectation that the Federal Reserve was going to cut rates, and was not going to cut rates. Sorry, beg your pardon, was going to cut rates, and that means we start seeing the US dollar starting to strengthen. And then when they realized that that wasn't going to happen, it drops down again. But now the situation is very, very volatile because everyone's watching inflation rates. If the inflation rate goes down, that means the Fed will cut rates. That's the thinking. That means the Thai baht will strengthen. And if inflation stays where it is or goes higher, I'm talking about US inflation, then the Fed will delay the cut in rates, and that keeps the dollar strengthening. And at the moment, you can see the dollar's around 36.58. It was well over 37 at some period of time. You can see it was 37.24. But we think it's going to trade in between 36 and 36.50, depending on where US inflation comes in. Moving on to silicon carbide and PowerMaster. So unfortunately, we had a very disappointing first quarter again for PMS. Our revenues came in at 90 million baht, 25% down on the quarter and 38% down on the year. And the reason for this was not so much for silicon carbide, but for our silicon business. And our silicon business still in the first quarter is about 80% of PMS's output. And the Chinese economy remains very weak, impacting the demand for silicon. So this is the main reason why. And the other reason was that during the first quarter, we, by Korean law, had to recertify all our electronic infrastructure. This is mandatory every 5 years in Korea, and we lost 10 days output due to that. So this impacted the ability to generate, the output. So those are the two reasons why we saw a drop, quarter on quarter and year on year. However, our silicon carbide equipment does continue to arrive on schedule and is in the process of qualification. And we do expect to see this starting to generate better sales for silicon carbide in the second quarter and onwards. So while silicon remains slow and challenging, silicon carbide still has good demand, and we hope that we can recover the situation as we move throughout the rest of this year. Okay. During this year, most of our silicon carbide will go to EV charging, solar panels, and data centers. We are still in the process of trying to qualify for the EV car that is on board, but it takes quite some time to do that. And we hope, if we're successful, to start delivering it into the onboard traction inverter, for example, on the EV car by the early part of next year. So there's a lot of mixed news about EV cars, which are slowing down in the US and in Europe, but are continuing to grow quite fast in China. And the overall forecast is still in this year expected to grow by 27%, which is down from last year, but still that is still a reasonable increase. But of course, it's very much driven by China. And if we look at the reported first quarter sales, over 3 million EV cars were sold in the first quarter, and that is still a 21% year-on-year increase globally, driven by China, 31%. China is now more than 50% of all the new cars are EVs sold in China now, and they will be leading the increase because they're the nation with the high volume, low cost car. And you can see a lot of these cars coming into Thailand as well. So the EV transition from EV to ICE will continue, but clearly the speed is going to change over time. But there's no question that over the next 5 years, particularly as battery performance improves, we will see a steady increase in conversion from combustion cars into electronic vehicles. And I put a slide up just to look at China, because China is important, particularly for our silicon carbide business. You can see that the property business on the left, top left, continues to be very, very difficult, and the consumer is not spending, but the government continues to subsidize and support industrial production. Okay, so you see industrial production going up, and they're focusing on the high-tech manufacturing, which is things like EV and PV. Okay, so this helps our business, but overall, with a weak general economy because of the property business and because the consumer is very weak, China still remains a very challenging economy. So here are the numbers for our liquidity. We generated over 800 million baht in the first quarter. That was an increase of about 110 from last year. We spent around 400 million, down 63 million baht in capex. And as I mentioned earlier, our net cash increased 5.6 billion from 3.1 to 8.7. So in summary, our OSAT business remains very weak, both in the Uyghur and Jiaxing, with utilization rates below 50% on average. And so whilst AI is doing well, analog, discretes, optoelectronics are still going through a recovery process, but we do expect that to improve in the second half of this year. Our EMS PCBA business is holding up very well, driven by automotive industrials, and RF remains strong. So that is supporting the group going forward. The US is performing well due to strong demand for RFID. PMS was impacted by weak silicon demand and the loss of output due to the shutdowns. And the weaker Thai baht, of course, did help margins. And if we look to the second quarter outlook, we still think the OSAT business will remain weak, but beginning to see some improvements in preparation for some level of recovery in the second half of this year. Our EMS business remains firm, supported by autos and industrials, and HANA Lamphun continues to win more market share for the RF business, so that looks positive. RFID business continues to also look positive, so that's also good news. Cambodia still remains weak, and we will work to see if we can rectify the situation by the end of this year. And we project PMS business to start recovering in the second quarter as our silicon carbide capacity starts to kick in. Finally, the equipment starts to come in. The US dollar versus the baht starts to weaken in response to a weaker US inflation outlook, but frankly speaking, the US dollar exchange rate will remain quite volatile going forward. So with that, I will end and open the floor for any questions.
สวัสดีนะคะมีคำถามเข้ามานะคะเดี๋ยวจะขออนุญาตแปลจากที่คุณริชาร์ดตอบนะคะคำถามแรกนะคะเป็นเกี่ยวกับกลยุทธ์การเติบโตในช่วงที่เหลือของปีนี้ของบริษัทเป็นอย่างไรบ้างนะคะ This question.
Well, I think I've tried to explain that our strategy for growth in the second quarter for the first quarter is no real different. It's going to be driven by our EMS business and the RFID business. I don't think we're going to see any substantial recovery in the OSAT business until the second half of this year, to be honest.
ค่ะก็ช่วงอย่างที่คุณริชาร์ดได้อธิบายไปใน presentation ก่อนล่วงหน้าว่าการเติบโตจะไม่เห็นแตกต่างมากแต่ว่าหลักๆก็จะเป็นของ EMS ของเรากับ RFID นะคะส่วน OSAT ของเราไม่เห็นความแตกต่างมากนักนะคะคำถามต่อไปนะคะภาพรวมของผลดำเนินงานไตรมาส 2เทียบกับไตรมาส 1เป็นอย่างไรบ้าง
Yeah. So yes, we have to answer that one.
โอเคคำถามถัดไปนะคะราคาทองกับราคาทองแดงนะคะที่ปรับขึ้นกระทบกับบริษัทอย่างไร
Yeah. So gold is hit all-time high recently, and copper is also very high, and these are two important commodities used in the electronics industry. Fortunately, this will have no real impact on us because we have agreements with our customers that any increases in the commodities will be passed on to them. So we have a mechanism to pass on these costs to our customers.
คำตอบคุณริชาร์ดนะคะราคาทองอย่างที่เราทั้งหลายทราบว่าสูงเป็นประวัติการณ์ส่วนราคาทองแดงก็สูงขึ้นเช่นเดียวกันแต่อย่างไรก็ตามนะคะผลกระทบของบริษัทแทบไม่มีเลยเพราะเนื่องจากว่าเรามีสัญญากับลูกค้าคู่ค้าของเราว่าเรามีการปรับราคาถ้าพวกราคาทองราคาทองแดงขึ้นหรือลงคำถามถัดไปนะคะตอนนี้บริษัทมีคำสั่งซื้อจากลูกค้าแล้วมูลค่าเท่าไหร่และรับรู้ภายในปีนี้เท่าไหร่
Yeah, so I think you know by now that HANA does not give specific guidance for sales revenue or profit projections. This year, I still think in general, the first half is going to be challenging, although as I've mentioned that we are more optimistic on the second half. I think if we can have some growth year on year, it will be a good achievement. But in general, I think it's going to be overall relatively difficult to see any significant growth this year versus last year. Top line.
คุณริชาร์ดตอบว่านะคะเนื่องจากว่า first half ก็คือช่วงครึ่งปีแรกเนี่ยไม่เห็นว่าจะเติบโตได้เท่าไหร่แต่ว่าเรามองว่า second half ของเราน่าจะมีผลประกอบการที่ดีขึ้นแต่อย่างไรก็ตามในภาพรวมเราก็ถ้าเปรียบเทียบกับปีที่แล้วก็น่าจะอยู่ในระดับคล้ายๆกันนะคะ
I think this is the same question really. Again, the target revenue growth we don't anticipate, but we're trying to have some level of growth versus last year. But if we have a relatively weak first half, it's challenging to make it up in the second half.
ก็อย่างไรก็ตามเราพยายามอย่างมากในการที่จะทำให้บริษัทเติบโตแต่ยังไงก็ด้วยความที่ครึ่งปีแรกถ้ามันค่อนข้างจะเติบโตยากนิดนึงนะคะแล้วก็ครึ่งปีหลังก็เราก็พยายามอย่างมากที่สุดค่ะคำถามถัดไปนะคะบริษัท FT1 ตั้งเป้ารายได้ปีนี้เติบโตเท่าไหร่และบริษัทจะรักษา Net Margin ให้เท่ากับปี2566ได้หรือไม่จากไตรมาส 1นะคะเห็นปรับลดลงมาพอสมควร
So margins are impacted by the overall business level, to cover our fixed costs and also exchange rates.
ค่ะผลกำไรของเราเนี่ยโดยมีผลกระทบมาจากต้นทุนหลักนะคะแล้วก็ความผันผวนของอัตราแลกเปลี่ยน
So as I mentioned earlier, the first half of this year, particularly from our OSAT business, is remaining challenging. But we do anticipate some recovery in the second half of this year. Also, our PMS business for the first half was challenging, but as our new equipment comes in, we expect that to improve in the second half of this year. So it looks like it's a year of two halves, the first half being challenging and the second half hopefully being an improvement.
ผลกระทบนะคะของครึ่งปีแรกเนี่ยเราเห็นได้อย่างชัดเจนจากbusiness ของเรานะคะและ EMS แต่ส่วนครึ่งปีหลังเรามีความหวังว่ามีแนวโน้มที่จะดีขึ้นนะคะ
And the exchange rate, of course, will have an impact on the margin. So in the first quarter of this year, we had a favorable weakness of the Thai baht versus US dollar compared to a year ago. But if the Federal Reserve in the US finally starts to cut rates, we expect to see the dollar weaken against all currencies, including the Thai baht. However, I think once that is out of the way, a lot of focus will come back onto the Thai economy and the issues that we have in Thailand in terms of our weak economic growth. And we may see the Thai baht starting to weaken again. So overall, we are expecting a fair amount of volatility of the Thai baht.
ส่วนเรื่องอัตราแลกเปลี่ยนนะคะด้วยความที่เราช่วงครึ่งปีที่ผ่านมาเนี่ยค่าเงินบาทที่อ่อนลงเนี่ยมีผลที่ดีสำหรับเราแต่อย่างไรก็ตามธนาคารกลางของสหรัฐก็อาจจะปรับดอกเบี้ยนะคะซึ่งก็อาจจะมีผลดีกับเราอีกว่าถ้าถึงดอลลาร์จะอ่อนลงแล้วประเทศไทยซึ่งเราก็มีทั้งimport export เนี่ยก็อาจจะทำให้เงินบาทไทยเราอ่อนลงได้อีกค่ะแล้วก็คำถามถัดไปนะคะบริษัท FT1 ที่ร่วมกับบริษัทย่อยปตท.ตอนนี้มีความคืบหน้าอย่างไรบ้างนะคะ
So as we disclosed through the stock exchange that HANA and PTT through their wholly owned subsidiary Universal set up a company FT1 to evaluate the possibility of establishing a wafer fab in Thailand. This is an ongoing process. It is a very big project, as you can imagine, and has to be very carefully evaluated. And we continue to discuss and analyze this project, and we hope that by September or maybe a little bit earlier, we can come to a final conclusion. And just to remind you that PTT is in control with 51% and HANA's 49%. So, ultimately, the decision will be based on that kind of ownership structure.
ค่ะส่วนของ FT1 นะคะเป็นอย่างที่ท่านทราบนะคะว่าเราร่วมมือกับปตท.นะคะเพื่อที่จะก่อตั้งwafer fab ซึ่งมันเป็นโปรเจกต์ที่ใหญ่มากแล้วเราก็ศึกษาวิเคราะห์อย่างถี่ถ้วนทำให้การที่จะคอนเฟิร์มว่าเราจะดำเนินการหรือไม่นั้นเป็นประมาณเดือนกันยายนแล้วก็โปรเจกต์นี้ปตท.ถือหุ้น 51% HANA ถือหุ้น 49% เพราะฉะนั้นการตัดสินใจใดๆก็จะตามสัดส่วนการถือหุ้นนี้นะคะถามถัดไปนะคะเป็นคำถามที่ถามว่าการที่11บริษัทของท็อป20บริษัทในการผลิต PCB ตอนนี้มาตั้งฐานผลิตในประเทศไทยผู้บริหารมีความกังวลเกี่ยวกับความสามารถในการแข่งขันและการทำกำไรที่น่าจะท้าทายมากขึ้นในอนาคตหรือไม่และมีข้อได้เปรียบทางการแข่งขันของบริษัทคืออะไรนะคะ
Okay, so yes, there's been a lot of new PCB companies relocated to Thailand. Let's be clear, these PCB companies are potential suppliers to HANA. HANA does not make PCBs. HANA buys PCBs from many companies, and we will be very happy that more and more PCB companies come to Thailand if they can lower the cost, to make it here and logistics cost, because we buy PCBs from them. We are not in the PCB manufacturing. We're in PCB assembly business.
ค่ะคำตอบของคุณริชาร์ดเรื่องนี้นะคะมันเป็นเรื่องน่ายินดีถ้าบริษัท PCB ทั้งหลายเข้ามาในประเทศไทยเพราะว่าบริษัท HANA ไม่ได้ผลิต PCB นะคะเราทำ PCB assembly นะคะเพราะฉะนั้นเนี่ยมันก็จะเป็นทางเลือกหลากหลายให้ HANA ที่จะมีซัพพลายเออร์ได้หลายๆเจ้าขึ้นแล้วก็อาจจะได้ราคาที่ดีขึ้นนะคะยัดไปคำถามต่อไปนะคะ HANA เข้าเกณฑ์บริษัทที่ต้องจ่าย global minimum tax หรือไม่ถ้าใช่ผู้บริหารคาดว่าจะส่งผลต่อกำไรสุทธิลดลงกี่เปอร์เซ็นต์เข้าใจว่ารายได้เกิน 750 ล้านยูโรต่อปีบริษัทจะต้องจ่ายขั้นต่ำ 15%
Yeah. So today, HANA has not reached the threshold to pay the global minimum tax, which is 750 million euros or equivalent.
ค่ะคือตอนนี้บริษัท HANA ยังไม่ได้ถึงรายได้ที่ตามกำหนดนะคะ750 ล้านยูโรต่อปีก็ยังไม่ต้องจ่าย minimum tax ตัวนี้
However, of course, we are not too far off that level at this point in time.
ค่ะก็แต่ยังไงก็ตามบริษัท HANA ก็ดูเรื่องนี้อยู่เพราะเนื่องจากว่าบริษัทเราก็รายได้ก็ใกล้เกือบใกล้จะถึงเกณฑ์ที่กำหนดแล้วค่ะ
So we have to consider how we can manage the growth of our business, but still not need to pay the global minimum tax of 15% because currently we are not paying 50%.
ก็เราก็อยู่ในขั้นตอนที่บริหารจัดการรายได้ของเราอยู่นะคะตอนนี้โอเคคำถามต่อไปนะคะเห็นว่าRFID ถูกใช้อย่างแพร่หลายในจีน HANA ได้ประโยชน์จากส่วนนี้หรือไม่อย่างไร
The answer is yes. RFID is being used in China and everywhere. And we have already set up quite a large capacity to assemble RFID, which is exactly the same as we do in America in our China facility. Part of that capacity in China will be used to go to Chinese companies who are exporting goods to the rest of the world. And part of it will be used for Chinese goods that are sold domestically. So RFID is going to be used globally, and we hope to benefit from this transition.
ส่วนเรื่องนี้นะคะเราได้เพิ่มกำลังการผลิตนะคะของ RFID ของเราในจีนและก็ตั้งใจว่าจะทั้งส่งออกและก็ขายในประเทศจีนเองนะคะเราคิดว่าการเติบโตของ RFID เนี่ยทำที่เติบโตอย่างมากขึ้น HANA ก็จะได้ผลประโยชน์จากการเพิ่มรายสายการผลิตตรงนี้ด้วยนะคะโอเคคำถามต่อไปนะคะในความเห็นของ HANA เมื่อใดที่ประเทศไทยจะเปลี่ยนไปใช้เทคโนโลยี RFID และ HANA จะได้ประโยชน์จากเหตุการณ์นี้อย่างไรในอีก 2-3 ปีข้างหน้านะคะ
I think that it really will depend on how progressive the retailing sectors are in adopting this new technology. The advantages of RFID is that you don't need to spend so much money to have many staff to track your inventory. That's the first thing. Now, of course, Thailand compared to the West, the labor is still cheap, so there tends not to be a big urgency. But of course, we know that minimum wages is rising all the time. So I think retailers will start looking. The other advantage is that you have far more accurate data because it's counted electronically, one, and two, you can track what we call shrinkage or people stealing from the warehouse much more effectively. So it really will depend on how retailers in Thailand, the big retailers, will adopt this technology. It's available and it is the way to go, but I really don't know how progressive they are.
โอเคนะคะคำตอบนะคะคุณวิชาตอบว่าถ้าพูดถึงเรื่อง RFID ถ้าจะใช้ในประเทศไทยเนี่ยผู้ค้ารายย่อยก็ถ้าในเมืองไทยเนี่ย ด้วยความที่ค่าแรงของเราถ้าเทียบกับประเทศฝั่งตะวันตกเนี่ยก็ยังไม่มากนักแต่อย่างไรก็ตามค่าแรงเราก็เพิ่มขึ้นส่วนของ RFID เนี่ยจะทำให้ช่วยลดพนักงานเพราะเราติดกับสินค้าแต่ข้อดีอีกอย่างหนึ่งก็คือเอาไว้สำหรับบริหารจัดการคลังสินค้านะคะเพื่อป้องกันการหายหรือว่าการ track ข้อมูลได้อย่างรวดเร็วนะคะคำถามต่อไปนะคะ โอเคแต่เรื่องค่าเงินบาทที่อ่อนค่าลงส่งผลดีอย่างไรกับบริษัทอันนี้ตอบไปแล้วนะคะก่อนหน้านั้นนะคะ แล้วก็คำถามต่อไปนะคะโอเคคำถามที่ถัดมานะคะถามว่าถ้าค่าเงินบาทเพิ่มขึ้นจะมีผลอย่างไรกับบริษัทนะคะ
So if the government introduces the 400 baht minimum wage, the impact approximately for HANA would be 15 million baht per quarter.
ค่ะถ้าค่าเงินเพิ่มเป็น400 บาทนะคะเราก็คำนวณแล้วจะตกประมาณ15 ล้านบาทต่อควอเตอร์นะคะที่จะส่งผลกระทบ
But again, we continue to work on many productivity and cost reduction activities. So whilst, of course, we have to pay according to the law if it's introduced, we are quite confident that we can offset, I don't know how much, but I'm quite positive we will not end up paying that amount more by the end of this year.
ค่ะก็คุณริชาร์ดแจ้งว่ายังไงก็ตามเนี่ยบริษัทเราก็ใช้วิธีการเพิ่ม productivity นะคะก็คือพยายามที่จะลดต้นทุนที่เป็นค่าแรงพนักงานนะคะว่าจะทำยังไงได้บ้างซึ่งเราค่อนข้างจะโฟกัสตรงนี้คำถามต่อไปนะคะ Silicon carbide what's the percentage of the silicon carbide sales?
It's less than 1%. If you go onto HANA's website and read the management discussion analysis, you can see the breakdown of every division.
ค่ะส่วนคำถามที่ว่าซิลิคอนคาร์ไบด์เริ่มขายได้กี่เปอร์เซ็นต์นะคะตอนนี้น้อยกว่า 1% ถ้าเข้าไปดูในหน้าเว็บไซต์นะคะคำถามต่อไปนะคะปีนี้มีการลงทุนอะไรเพิ่มเติมอีกไหมและตั้งงบลงทุนปีนี้เท่าไหร่นะคะ
This year, probably we're looking at about 3.5 billion baht.
3,500 ล้านบาทนะคะปีนี้ที่แพลนไว้ว่าจะลงทุนนะคะถามว่า product ใหม่นะคะที่เรากำลังพัฒนาอยู่เป็นอย่างไรบ้างนะคะ
Well, I mean, obviously, we talked about the FT1 project, which, if this one progresses, will be a very big project for us. So, if this is announced, I think that would be the biggest one. But otherwise, we do have continuing, small projects, a number of small projects in every division, which we don't necessarily announce individually. But there is a lot of activity going on.
ค่ะโปรเจกต์ที่เราทำการพัฒนานะคะถ้าพูดถึงถ้าใหญ่ที่สุดก็คือตัวที่เป็น FT1 โปรเจกต์ถ้าเราประกาศว่าเราตกลงว่าเราจะทำต่อไปนะคะส่วนโปรเจกต์อื่นๆนะคะแต่ละโรงงานของเราก็มีโปรเจกต์หลากหลายนะคะซึ่งเราก็ไม่ได้ประกาศออกมาเป็นรายย่อยๆว่ามีโปรเจกต์อะไรแต่ละอันนะคะแต่เรามีโปรเจกต์หลายๆอันค่ะคำถามถัดมานะคะ
Structural deficiency. I would say in general, I wouldn't say a structural deficiency, but definitely skilled labor in not only Thailand, most of Southeast Asian economies is in short supply because of the high demand.
ค่ะก็ทางด้วยความที่ภาคพื้นเอเชียของเรานะคะก็ยังเรียกว่ายังขาดแรงงานอยู่ตอนนี้นะคะ
So the name FT1 I think stands for first Thai one.
FT1 มาจากอะไรนะคะมาจากคำว่า first Thai แล้วก็ one นะคะ FT1 what will be the product for FT1?
It will be a silicon. It will be a wafer fab producing silicon wafers. ค่ะก็จะ
เป็นผลิตเวเฟอร์ซึ่งเวเฟอร์นี้ก็จะเป็นสำหรับซิลิคอนเวเฟอร์
which is very high technology, by far the highest technology in the semiconductor world.
ค่ะเป็นเทคโนโลยีที่สูงที่สุดตอนนี้ของSemiconductor. Okay.
I think we're out of time, but if there are any more questions, that's it.
We already said that.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? So if not, then thank you very much, and I think we can close the meeting now. Thank you. ขอบคุณครับ